Have you ever done something you believed was the single most defining act of love in your life? An act so selfless, so all-consuming that it felt like you were pouring your entire soul into a single gesture, hoping it would be the glue that finally mended all the broken pieces of the people you cherish most. I have. I wrote a check for $300,000, a number that represented every late night at the office, every weekend. I'd sacrificed every dream I had meticulously built for myself, brick by painful brick. I handed over my future to save my family's past, believing it would buy us a new beginning. I thought it would make me their hero. Instead, it made me a ghost. A ghost in the halls of the very home. I saved a ghost at the dinner table I kept from being repossessed. A ghost in the family photos I was no longer invited to be in. My name is Alex Carter, and this is the story of how paying off my family's crippling debt didn't bring us closer together, but instead built a wall so high and so cold that I'm not sure I'll ever feel the warmth of their love again. Before we dive into the phone call that shattered my world, let me paint you a picture of the life I had built, a life I was so incredibly proud of. I wasn't some trust fund kid or a tech mogul who stumbled into a fortune. Everything I had, I earned. I grew up in a small blue-collar town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your business, and Friday night football is the biggest event of the year. My parents, Mark and Susan, were the epitome of the American dream, or at least the pursuit of it. My dad, Mark, was a master carpenter, a man who could turn a block of wood into a piece of art with his bare, calloused hands. He had this infectious optimism, always chasing the next big idea that was going to be the one. My mom, Susan, was the heart of our home. She was a nurse, but her real full-time job was being the emotional bedrock of our family. She could soothe any scrape, calm any fear, and her spaghetti sauce was legendary. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older sister Jessica and my younger brother Ben. Jessica was the golden child. She was smart, beautiful, and effortlessly popular. She did everything right. Head cheerleader, valedictorian, married her high school sweetheart, a successful dentist named Tom, and now had two perfect kids in a beautiful suburban house with a white picket fence. Ben, on the other hand, was the free spirit, the artist. He was charming and wildly talented, but he drifted through life like a leaf on the wind, always chasing a new passion, a new city, a new dream that never quite paid the bills. That left me Alex, the quiet one, the observer. I was the reliable one. The one who got good grades, never got into trouble, and figured out early on that the surest way to avoid being a burden was to be completely self-sufficient. From the moment I got my first paper route at 12, I was a saver. I watched my dad's business ventures rise and fall. He'd have a great year building custom cabinets, and we'd have a fancy Christmas. Then he'd invest it all in a revolutionary new tool that would flop, and the next year we'd be eating casseroles and my mom would be picking up extra shifts at the hospital, her eyes heavy with a weariness she tried so hard to hide. I saw the whispered arguments over bills, the tension that would fill our small house like a fog. I learned that money wasn't just paper. It was security, it was peace, it was the absence of that gut-wrenching fear. So I worked. I worked through high school, bagging groceries and mowing lawns. I worked my way through college at Ohio State, juggling classes with 2 part-time jobs, and I graduated with a degree in computer science, and more importantly, without a single dollar of student debt. I moved to Austin for a job at a burgeoning tech company. I loved the energy of the city, the opportunity, the feeling that I was finally in control of my own destiny. I lived modestly even as my salary grew. I drove a 10-year-old Honda, cooked most of my meals at home, and found joy in simple things like hiking and reading. While my friends were buying new cars and taking lavish vacations, I was funneling every spare dollar into my investment portfolio and a high-yield savings account. My goal was clear. By the time I was 35, I wanted to have enough for a down payment on a house and enough seed money to start my own small software consulting firm. It was my dream, my quiet rebellion against the financial chaos of my childhood. That savings account wasn't just a number on a screen. It was my freedom. It was the white picket fence I was building for myself. At 32, I was well on my way. I had just crossed the $300,000 mark. I remember seeing the number and feeling a profound sense of peace. I had done it. I had built a safety net so strong that nothing could break it. Or so I thought. The phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was Jessica. Her calls were usually cheerful and breezy, full of anecdotes about the kids or plans for their next family vacation to Disney. But not this time. Her voice was thin brittle like a pane of glass about to shatter. "Alex, are you sitting down?" My stomach immediately clenched. In my family, that phrase was a prelude to disaster. I sat on the edge of my sofa, the city lights outside my window suddenly feeling a million miles away. She took a shaky breath, and the words tumbled out a torrent of panic and shame. Dad's latest venture, a custom furniture business he'd poured everything into, had gone under. Not just failed, but failed spectacularly. He had taken out a second mortgage on their house, maxed out over a dozen credit cards, and borrowed money from lenders I'd never even heard of. They were drowning. The bank was threatening foreclosure. The credit card companies were calling at all hours. They were going to lose everything. The house I grew up in, the workshop where my dad had taught me how to sandwood the backyard, where we'd had countless barbecues. It was all about to be gone. How much, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I could hear her start to sob on the other end of the line. "Alex, it's bad. It's around 300,000. The number hung in the air between us, echoing the number on my savings account statement. It was a perfect, terrible match. It felt like a cruel joke written by the universe. She told me they had hidden it from all of us. They were too proud, too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten. Mom was a wreck. Dad had locked himself in his workshop for days, and Ben was nowhere to be found, probably off chasing some new muse in another state. "You're the only one who can help, Alex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were always the smart one, the responsible one. Please, we have nowhere else to turn." I ended the call in a daze. I walked to my window and stared out at the vibrant, pulsating city, but I didn't see it. I saw my mother's tired face. I saw the shame in my father's eyes, the last time one of his businesses failed. I saw the foreclosure notice on the front door of my childhood home. And then I opened my laptop and looked at that number. $300,000. My future, my freedom, my peace, and I knew with a sickening certainty that I was about to give it all away. If you've ever felt torn between your own future and the needs of your family, if you've ever wondered where the line is between helping and self-destruction, then you're going to want to hear the rest of this story. Hit that like button and please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. Because believe me, the payment was only the beginning of the nightmare. The night after Jessica's call was the longest of my life. Sleep was a foreign country I couldn't get a visa to. I just lay there staring at the textured ceiling of my apartment, the shadows from the streetlights outside dancing like specters on the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two numbers, both identical, warring for my soul. One was the balance in my investment account, a figure glowing with the promise of a future I had painstakingly designed. The other was the debt my family was drowning in, a figure screaming with the desperation of their past. The weight of that decision pressed down on me heavier than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. For me, it was a shield. It was the tangible proof that I had broken the cycle of financial instability that had haunted my childhood. It was the quiet confidence that if my car broke down, or if I had a medical emergency, or if I lost my job, I would be okay. I wouldn't have to experience that cold, creeping panic I had seen so often in my parents' eyes. Giving it away felt like willingly walking out into a storm without a coat, knowing full well I would be soaked to the bone and left shivering. But the alternative felt even colder. How could I sit here in my comfortable Austin apartment knowing that my parents were about to be homeless? How could I continue to build my future on the ruins of theirs? I thought back to all the little things they had done for me. My dad, despite his financial follies, had spent an entire summer building me the most incredible treehouse in the neighborhood, complete with a pulley system for snacks. My mom had worked double shifts for a month to help me afford my first clunker of a car when I was 16. They weren't perfect, far from it, but they were my parents. They had given me life, and in their own flawed way they had loved me. Didn't I owe them this? Wasn't this what a good son was supposed to do? I got up around 3 a.m., unable to lie still any longer. I went to the kitchen and started pacing my bare feet cold on the linoleum floor. I made a mental list of pros and cons, like the logical, analytical person I was. The pros were simple yet monumental. My parents keep their home. Their lifetime of memories isn't thrown out on the curb. The crushing stress is lifted and my family is saved. The cons were a longer, more selfish list. My dream of starting a business is delayed indefinitely. My goal of homeownership is pushed back by a decade or more. My financial security is completely wiped out and I would be starting over from zero at 32. And a darker thought, a little voice of resentment I tried to squash, whispered in the back of my mind, "This isn't your fault. Why should your future be the sacrifice for their mistakes?" It was a question that felt like a betrayal just to think, but it was there nagging at me. The next morning, I called my best friend Leo. Leo and I had been friends since our freshman year at Ohio State. He was a financial advisor, a straight shooter who had helped me map out my investment strategy from the very beginning. He knew my goals better than anyone. I laid out the whole situation for him, my voice flat and exhausted from a sleepless night. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," he finally said. "Alex, that's heavy, man." I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "So let me get this straight. They want you to liquidate everything, the entire 300K. They didn't ask for a specific number," I clarified, "but that's the total." "And yes, it would mean cashing out everything. My stocks, my mutual funds, all of it," Leo sighed. "Look, as your friend, my heart goes out to you. I can't imagine what you're feeling. But as your unofficial financial advisor, Alex, this is a terrible idea." He went on to explain in calm, rational terms everything I already knew. The tax implications of cashing out my investments all at once would be brutal. I'd be losing years of compound growth. He reminded me of the core problem. This wasn't just a one-time crisis. It was a pattern of behavior. "What happens next time, Alex?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "You pay this off and you become the family safety net. Your dad starts another business. Your brother needs a loan for his next brilliant art project. Where does it end? Giving them this money doesn't solve the root issue. It just puts a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. You're not fixing the problem, you're enabling it." Every word he said was true. I knew he was right. My logical brain was screaming at me to listen to him. I could offer to help in other ways. I could pay for them to see a financial counselor, help them create a budget, maybe cover their mortgage for a few months while they got back on their feet. There were other options, smarter options that didn't involve my own financial annihilation. But my heart wasn't listening to logic. It was listening to the memory of my mother's sobbing on the phone. It was picturing my father, a proud man, utterly broken. Logic couldn't fix the immediate catastrophic problem. Foreclosure was imminent. They didn't have time for a budget or a payment plan. They needed a miracle. "I know you're right, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know all of that. But I can't let them lose the house. I can't. Leo was quiet for a moment. Then you're not asking for my advice, he said softly. You're just telling me what you're going to do. He was right. I think I had made the decision the moment Jessica told me the number. The rest was just a painful formality. We talked for a while longer, and he gave me some practical advice on the least damaging way to liquidate my assets. We hung up, and I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I was about to make the biggest decision of my life, a decision my closest friend thought was a mistake, and I had never felt more alone. That afternoon, I called Jessica back. "I'll do it," I said, without any preamble. The relief in her voice was so profound, it was almost tangible. She burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Oh my God, Alex, thank you, you've saved us, you've saved everything." She put me on speakerphone and my mom got on the line, her voice choked with emotion, calling me her angel, her hero. My dad even came to the phone, and in a voice thick with unshed tears, he just said, "Son, I don't know what to say. I'll pay you back. I swear it, every single penny." Their gratitude washed over me, a warm wave that temporarily soothed the raging sea of my own anxiety. For a fleeting moment, I felt a powerful rush of purpose. Leo was wrong. This wasn't enabling. This was love. This was what family did for each other. I was the one who could fix this, and I would. This act would be the great reset button for the Carter family. We would emerge from this stronger, closer, and more responsible than ever before. I clung to that thought like a life raft. It was the only thing keeping me from drowning in the reality of what I was about to do, erase my entire future to pay for their past. The process began the next day, a series of clicks and phone calls that felt surreal, like I was dismantling my own life piece by piece, watching my future turn into a balance of zero. The days that followed my decision were a blur of sterile financial transactions that felt completely detached from the emotional gravity of the situation. I spent hours on the phone with brokerage firms and my bank. My voice a calm, steady monotone as I authorized the liquidation of my life's work. Yes, I understand the tax implications. Yes, I'm aware of the early withdrawal penalties. No, I do not need to speak with a financial consultant. With each click, with each verbal confirmation, I felt a piece of my meticulously constructed future crumbling into digital dust. I watched as years of disciplined saving, of compound interest I had once marveled at, vanished from my screen. It was a strange out-of-body experience. I knew it was my money, my future, but I had to emotionally disconnect from it to get through the process. I treated it like a work project, a complex problem to be solved with efficiency and precision. The money finally cleared and landed in my checking account a week later. Seeing that number, $302, 451.28 to be exact, sitting there felt obscene. It was a sum I had never possessed in liquid form, and its tenure in my account was going to be shorter than a mayfly's lifespan. The plan was for me to pay off the debts directly. Jessica had overnighted me a thick folder filled with the grim reality of their situation, threatening letters from the bank, credit card statements with horrifying interest rates, and loan documents from private lenders. For 2 full days, I sat at my kitchen table, transforming it into a war room. I was methodical. I called each creditor, navigating automated phone systems and speaking to collection agents. I negotiated payoff amounts, arranged wire transfers, and documented every single transaction on a spreadsheet. I was no longer their son. I was their crisis manager, their unpaid financial fixer. The final and largest payment was the second mortgage that was triggering the foreclosure. I went to my bank in person to get a cashier's check. The teller, a friendly woman named Maria who knew me from my regular deposits, raised her eyebrows when she saw the amount. $212, 0000, she whistled softly. Someone's buying a very nice house. I forced a smile. Something like that, I said. Just helping out family. The weight of that check in my hand was immense, both physically and metaphorically. This thin piece of paper was a house. It was my parents' past and my own foregone future all condensed into a few lines of official-looking ink. When the last debt was paid, a strange emptiness settled over me. There was no confetti, no triumphant music, just silence and the stark reality of my own bank account, now reduced to a meager four-figure number that was barely enough to cover my next month's rent. I called Jessica to tell her it was done. The screaming and crying that erupted from the other end of the phone was deafening. They were laughing and sobbing at the same time. "It's over. It's really over," my mom kept saying. "Alex, you're our hero, our savior." My dad got on the phone, his voice filled with a renewed vigor I hadn't heard in years. "We're having a celebration this weekend, son. You have to come home. We need to thank you properly. We're going to have a huge barbecue, the whole family. This is a new start for all of us, thanks to you." The 3-hour drive from Austin to their small town felt different this time. Usually it was a trip I made with a mix of affection and mild obligation. This time I felt like a conquering hero returning from war. I had slayed the dragon of their debt, and I was coming home to a hero's welcome. I allowed myself to feel a flicker of pride, of hope. Maybe this truly was the turning point. Maybe this grand gesture was exactly what our family needed to finally heal and move forward together. When I pulled into the driveway, the scene was exactly as my dad had promised. The backyard was filled with people, aunts, uncles, cousins. The grill was smoking, and the sound of laughter and music filled the air. As I got out of my car, my mom saw me and ran over, throwing her arms around me and holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "My wonderful boy," she whispered into my shoulder. "You did it. You saved us." My dad was next, clapping me on the back with a force that nearly knocked me over. His eyes were bright, and he had a wide, genuine smile on his face. "Welcome home, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. For the rest of the afternoon, I was the guest of honor. Every relative came up to me, hugging me, shaking my hand, telling me what an incredible thing I had done. My sister Jessica followed me around a protective lioness, telling everyone, "This is my brother Alex. He's the one who fixed everything." My brother-in-law Tom, who had always been a bit condescending towards my boring tech job, looked at me with a newfound respect. It was intoxicating. The validation, the gratitude, the love, it was everything I had hoped for. I felt like I was floating on a cloud of their appreciation. We ate burgers and potato salad, shared old stories, and for the first time in a very long time, my family felt whole. There was no tension, no whispered arguments, just a pure, unadulterated sense of relief and celebration. That evening, after most of the relatives had left, my dad pulled me aside into his workshop. The smell of sawdust and varnish was the scent of my childhood. He sat me down on an old stool and looked me straight in the eye. "Alex," he started, "I know I said this on the phone, but I need to say it to your face. I will pay you back every single cent of that money. This time is different. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to rebuild my business the right way this time. Small, manageable, no more big risks. I'm going to make you proud, and I'm going to make this right." He laid out his new business plan, and for the first time, it sounded grounded, realistic. My mom and Jessica joined us, and they all made a solemn vow. This was day one of the new Carter family. They were going to be financially responsible. They were going to communicate. They were going to work together. And they were going to pay me back. As I drove back to Austin the next day, a genuine sense of optimism bloomed in my chest. The emptiness I had felt was replaced by a feeling of profound fulfillment. I had lost my savings, yes, but I had gained something far more valuable, a renewed, stronger, healthier family. I had bought them a second chance, and in doing so, I felt like I had secured my place at the center of their world. I was no longer just the quiet, reliable middle child. I was Alex the hero, the savior, the one who had held the family together when it was about to fall apart. It was a role I was proud to play, and I truly believed that the worst was over. I had made the ultimate sacrifice, and my reward was a family reborn. I couldn't have been more wrong. The celebration wasn't a new beginning. It was a final, grand performance before the curtain fell and I was left standing alone on an empty stage. The feeling of optimism I carried on that drive back to Austin was a potent, intoxicating drug. It felt like I hadn't just paid off a debt. I had purchased a new version of my family, an upgraded model free from the bugs of financial anxiety and resentment that had plagued our operating system for years. For the first few weeks, that feeling seemed justified. My phone, which had often sat silent for days, was now constantly buzzing with life from Ohio. My mom would call me in the middle of the day just to tell me about a new recipe she was trying or a funny thing the neighbor's dog did. They were small, insignificant calls, but they felt momentous. They were calls made not out of need, but out of a simple desire to connect. My dad, true to his word, would call me every few days with updates on his new business plan. He spoke with a clarity and focus I hadn't heard from him since I was a kid. He was starting small, taking on manageable custom jobs he could do himself, building a client base through word of mouth instead of risky advertising. He talked about profit margins and overhead with a new, sober vocabulary. "I'm tracking every penny, son," he'd say proudly. "Just like you would." Jessica sent me a stream of photos and videos of my niece and nephew with captions like, "Look who's missing their Uncle Alex." It was a level of inclusion I had rarely felt from her. I was no longer just the reliable but distant brother in Texas. I was an integral part of the family narrative, the hero of the latest chapter. And I clung to this narrative desperately because the reality of my own life had become terrifyingly stark. Back in Austin, I was living a life of severe austerity. My magnificent savings, the pillar of my existence, was gone. The four-figure balance left in my account was a constant screaming reminder of my vulnerability. I had to make drastic changes immediately. I canceled my gym membership, my streaming services, even my cherished subscription to The New Yorker. Nights out with friends were replaced with evenings at home, nursing a cheap beer and telling myself it was a choice, a temporary belt-tightening. When my friend Leo invited me on a weekend camping trip, I had to decline. Just swamped with work. I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. How could I explain to him that the $30 for gas and the $50 for food and supplies was a luxury I couldn't afford? How could I admit that the man who had just commanded a sum of $300,000 was now anxiously checking his bank balance before buying groceries? A profound sense of shame began to creep in. I was proud of what I had done for my family, but I was deeply embarrassed by the consequences it had on my own life. I was living a double life, the celebrated family savior in their eyes, and a man teetering on the edge of financial precariousness in my own. I pushed these feelings down, telling myself it was temporary. Every phone call from home, every expression of gratitude was a deposit into my emotional bank account, and I told myself it would be enough to sustain me until the real money started getting paid back. The shift was so subtle at first that I barely noticed it. It was like the changing of a season. You don't notice the days getting shorter one by one until one day you realize it's dark at 5 p.m. The daily calls from my mom became every few days calls. The updates became less about her day and more about things. New things. One day she called bubbling with excitement about the new stainless steel refrigerator they had just bought. "Oh, Alex, you should see it. It has a water dispenser and an ice machine. Your father got a great deal on it at the Memorial Day sale." I stood in my own small kitchen looking at my old rumbling fridge with its broken ice tray, and a strange, bitter feeling coiled in my stomach. "Oh," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. That's great, Mom. I'm glad you guys are treating yourselves." "Well, your father said we deserved something nice after all the stress," she said cheerfully. "It's part of the new beginning." I hung up the phone feeling unsettled. A new refrigerator. It wasn't a Rolls-Royce, but it wasn't a necessity either. Where did the money for that come from? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Dad had a few good jobs right away. Maybe they used a store credit card with a no-interest introductory period. But the question lingered a small crack in the foundation of my optimism. A week later, the calls from my dad stopped being about his business plan and started becoming more vague. When I asked him how the repayment plan was coming along, his tone for the first time became defensive. "Son, these things take time," he said, a familiar edge to his voice. "I've got to rebuild my reputation, get some capital together. You can't just expect cash to start flowing overnight. I thought you, of all people, would understand that." The implication was clear. I was being impatient. I was being demanding. The sting of it was sharp and unexpected. I wasn't demanding anything. I was just asking about the promise he had so solemnly made. I quickly backpedaled, assuring him I trusted him completely and was just curious. But the warmth was gone from the conversation. It felt like a door had been gently but firmly closed in my face. The real turning point came during a conversation with Jessica. She called to chat and mentioned in passing that she and Tom were helping their parents remodel the master bathroom. "It's going to be gorgeous," she gushed. "We're putting in one of those walk-in showers and a new vanity with a marble top. Tom's brother gives us a great discount on tile." I was stunned into silence. A bathroom remodel, that was a major expense, tens of thousands of dollars. "Wow," I managed to say. How are they affording that?" There was a slight pause on her end. "Well, Tom and I are kicking in most of it as a sort of late anniversary gift," she said a little too quickly. "And Dad's business is picking up. Besides, Tom said it's a good investment in the house. You know, for resale value." Then came the line that felt like a physical blow. "Honestly, Alex," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Tom thinks you were a bit naive to just hand over all that cash. He said there were much smarter ways to structure a loan with legal paperwork and everything to protect yourself. He was surprised you didn't think of that." I felt the blood drain from my face. I was speechless. So now I wasn't the hero anymore. I was the naive younger brother. My sacrifice, the act that had been lauded as the ultimate expression of love, was now being reframed as a foolish, unsophisticated financial move by my brother-in-law, the successful dentist. And my sister was agreeing with him. I was the chump who had wiped out his life savings, while Tom, the real smart one, was swooping in to fund an unnecessary bathroom remodel and critique my methods. The gratitude had evaporated, replaced by condescension. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to ask her where Tom's smarter ways were when their parents were a week away from being thrown out on the street. I wanted to remind her that it was my naive cash that had saved the very house they were now so blithely renovating. But I didn't. I just mumbled something about having to go and hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the city lights of Austin beginning to twinkle outside. The hero's welcome felt like a distant, fabricated memory. The promises made in my dad's workshop felt like lines from a play. I was beginning to understand a terrible, chilling truth. I hadn't just paid off their debt. I had become the living, breathing embodiment of their greatest failure. I was the walking reminder of their shame. And it was becoming increasingly clear that the easiest way for them to forget their shame was to simply forget me. The silence from their end was no longer an accident. It was an echo of the void in my bank account, a reflection of the emptiness I was beginning to feel in my soul. I was being erased, and the worst part was I had handed them the eraser. The drive home for Thanksgiving that year was a pilgrimage of anxiety. The 3 hours of Texas highway unspooling before me felt like a long gray ribbon of dread. Just a few months prior, I had driven this same road with a heart full of heroic purpose and naive optimism. Now my stomach was a knot of confusion and hurt. I kept replaying the recent conversations in my head, trying to piece them together, trying to find a version of events where I wasn't the fool. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe Jessica was just carelessly repeating something Tom had said. Maybe my dad was just stressed about the new business and had snapped at me unintentionally. I was a master of making excuses for them, a skill I had honed since childhood. I decided on a strategy. I would go home, be cheerful, and not mention the money, the bathroom, or any of it. I would prove to them and to myself that everything was fine, that our new beginning was still on track. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew I had been lying to myself. The atmosphere wasn't hostile, but it was different. It was polite. The desperate, clinging gratitude was gone, replaced by a sort of careful, cordial distance. My mom gave me a quick, one-armed hug before turning back to the turkey in the oven. My dad shook my hand and asked, "How was the drive?" with the same detached interest he might show a distant cousin. The house itself felt different, too. The new refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, a gleaming silver monolith. I could hear the sound of construction from upstairs. The intermittent whine of a the bathroom remodel was underway. These were the monuments to my sacrifice, and yet they felt alien to me, symbols of a new chapter in which I had no part. The most jarring change was the presence of my younger brother Ben. He had drifted back into town a month earlier, drawn by the news of the family's miraculous financial recovery. He was sitting on the living room sofa, laughing with my dad, looking tan and relaxed. He had spent the last 6 months in California trying to make it as a surf photographer, a venture that had predictably ended with him being broke. Yet here he was welcomed back into the fold without question. "Alex, my man," he said, getting up to give me a bro hug. "Heard you saved the day. Legendary stuff." There was no malice in his voice, just a breezy, detached admiration, as if I'd won a round of golf. Dinner was a masterclass in controlled conversation. Everyone talked about safe, superficial topics: the weather, my nephew's soccer team, Ben's amazing photos from the West Coast. There was a conspicuous bubble of silence around the topics of finances, the debt, or the future of my dad's business. It was as if the harrowing events of the past summer had never happened. I felt like a guest who had stumbled into a private family gathering, privy to a history that everyone else had tacitly agreed to forget. I tried to join in, asking Ben about his photography, complimenting my mom on the food, but my contributions felt like rocks dropped into a pond, creating a momentary ripple before sinking without a trace. The true gut punch came during dessert. My mom brought out her famous pecan pie, and as everyone was digging in, my dad cleared his throat. "So your mother and I have been talking," he announced, beaming. "Now that things are stable and the business is on the right track, we think we're going to finally take that trip to Hawaii for our anniversary next spring." A chorus of excited chatter erupted around the table. Jessica immediately chimed in. "Oh, you have to. Tom and I went to Maui last year. I can give you all the best spots to go." Ben added, "You guys should learn to scuba dive. It'd be epic." They went on like this for 10 minutes, excitedly planning the details of a lavish vacation, flights, resorts, excursions. And not once did anyone look at me. Not once did anyone include me in the conversation. They all knew without a single word being spoken that a trip to Hawaii was as financially feasible for me as a trip to the moon. I sat there, a piece of pie untouched on my plate, and felt a cold, creeping invisibility wash over me. I wasn't just being excluded from a conversation about a vacation. I was being excluded from the new family dream, the dream my money was funding. They were sipping the champagne, and I was the empty bottle they had tossed aside. The casualness of it was what hurt the most. It wasn't a deliberate, malicious act of cruelty. It was worse. It was thoughtlessness. I had become so irrelevant to their new financially secure reality that it didn't even occur to them that their discussion might be painful for me. My mom finally seemed to notice my silence. She turned to me, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced. "Oh, Alex, this probably all sounds terribly boring to you, doesn't it?" she said, a nervous laugh in her voice. And that was it. That was the moment the last shred of my hope died. I wasn't boring. I was broke, and they had made me that way. The drive back to Austin that night was a blur of rage and sorrow. The excuses were gone. The rationalizations had evaporated. All that was left was the raw, undeniable truth. They weren't grateful. They were ashamed. And I was the source of their shame. My presence was a constant reminder of the moment they had hit rock bottom, the moment they had to be bailed out by their quiet, responsible son. They didn't want a reminder. They wanted a clean slate. And to get that clean slate, they had to wipe me off of it. The following weeks confirmed my realization. I tried calling a few times, but the conversations were strained and short. My texts often went unanswered for days. Then came the evidence broadcast for the world to see on social media. Jessica posted an album titled Fun Family Weekend. It was filled with pictures of them at a local fall festival. My parents, Jessica, Tom, their kids, and Ben. They were all there, smiling, eating caramel apples, posing on a hayride. I wasn't in a single picture. I hadn't even been invited. I scrolled through the photos, each one a small, sharp stab to the heart. There was my father buying a ridiculously oversized stuffed animal for my nephew, a casual display of disposable income. There was my mother linking arms with Ben, beaming with pride. They looked so happy, so normal, so complete. Without me, that was when I knew I couldn't live in this ambiguous silence any longer. The hurt had curdled into a hard, cold anger. I needed answers. I needed to hear it from them. I needed them to look me in the eye and explain how the man they called their hero 3 months ago was now not even worthy of an invitation to a pumpkin patch. I got in my car on a Saturday morning with no plan other than to drive the 3 hours to their house and confront them. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare their excuses or to simply not answer the door. As I drove, I rehearsed the conversation in my head, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. This time there would be no polite silence. This time there would be a reckoning. I was going to force them to look at the ghost they had created and acknowledge that he was still there, and he was their son. The architecture of the wall they had built between us was now clear to see, and I was arriving with a sledgehammer. The drive to my parents' house was fueled by a righteous, white-hot anger. Every mile that passed every familiar landmark on the highway only stoked the flames. The gentle sadness I had felt after Thanksgiving had been burned away, leaving behind something harder, something sharper. I wasn't going there as a wounded son seeking comfort. I was going as a creditor demanding an audit, not of money, but of love and respect. I parked my beat-up Honda down the street, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked up the familiar concrete path, the same one I'd skinned my knees on as a kid, and stood before the front door. The house looked peaceful, deceptively normal. A new festive autumn wreath hung on the door, a cheerful touch that felt like a mockery. I didn't knock. I used the key I'd had since I was a teenager, a key I wasn't even sure would still work. It turned in the lock with a familiar click, and I stepped inside. The scene in the living room was one of cozy domesticity. My parents and Ben were sitting on the couch watching a football game. A half-eaten pizza sat on the coffee table. They looked up as I entered, and for a split second there was a flicker of something in their eyes. Surprise, yes, but also a flash of guilt, like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. My dad was the first to recover, clicking off the television with the remote. "Alex, what are you doing here? You should have called." His voice was tight, the forced welcome of a man caught off guard. "Why?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm as I closed the door behind me. "So you could come up with an excuse for me not to come, so you could pretend you weren't home." My mom stood up, wringing her hands, her face a mask of nervous concern. "Of course not, sweetheart. We're always happy to see you. We just weren't expecting you." I can see that I said, my gaze sweeping over the comfortable scene. "Looks like I missed another fun family weekend." I saw Ben flinch slightly at my words. My mom's face paled. She knew I had seen the photos. "Oh, Alex, that was just a last-minute thing," she stammered. "Ben was here and the weather was so nice we just decided to go. It wasn't a big deal." It wasn't a big deal. My voice started to rise, the carefully controlled calm beginning to fracture. "It wasn't a big deal to not invite your son. The son who kept this roof over your head. Was a simple phone call too much to ask?" My dad stood up, then his posture defensive, his face hardening into the stubborn mask I knew so well. "Now hold on a minute," he said, pointing a finger at me. "You're not going to come into my house and start making accusations. We've been under a lot of stress." "Stress?" I let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You want to talk about stress? Let's talk about the stress of watching your life savings evaporate overnight. Let's talk about the stress of wondering how you're going to pay next month's rent. Let's talk about the stress of being treated like a stranger by the very people you sacrificed everything for." The words poured out of me, a torrent of pain and anger that had been dammed up for months. I turned to Ben. "And you disappear for 6 months, contribute nothing, and you waltz back in here and get the hero's welcome. You get family weekends and pizza parties." Ben had the grace to look ashamed, staring down at his feet. "Alex, man, it wasn't like that," he mumbled. "Wasn't it?" I shot back. "Tell me, what was it like?" But my real anger was for my father. I turned back to him, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "You stood in your workshop and you looked me in the eye. You gave me your word. You promised you would pay me back. You promised this was a new beginning. What happened to that promise? Does a new refrigerator and a bathroom remodel come before paying back the $300,000 you owe me?" The silence in the room was deafening. My mom sank back onto the couch, her face in her hands. My dad's face was flushed, a mixture of anger and deep, profound shame. "That's not fair," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly. "The business takes time to get going. The renovations, that was Jessica and Tom's idea. They wanted to help." "Help?" I was incredulous. "They helped by putting in a marble vanity. I helped by preventing you from being homeless. Do you see the difference? Or has the gratitude been so completely replaced by entitlement that you can't even tell anymore?" And then my dad said the words that would shatter the last remaining fragment of our relationship. He looked at me, his eyes cold, and said, "You know we didn't ask you to do it. You offered. You came in here acting like some big shot writing checks. Did you think that bought you the right to control our lives forever, to hold this over our heads for the rest of time? The cruelty of it took my breath away." He was twisting my sacrifice into an act of arrogant control. He was recasting my love as a power play. He was taking the most selfless thing I had ever done and turning it into a weapon against me. I just stared at him, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. I saw it all with a terrible clarity. It was never about the money. It was about the shame. Paying me back meant acknowledging the debt, not just the financial one, but the emotional one. It meant having to look at me every day and be reminded of their failure. It was easier to renovate the bathroom, to take a trip to Hawaii, to build a new life on the foundation I had provided, and to simply write me out of the architectural plans. It was easier to cast me as the villain, the demanding creditor, than to live with the fact that they were the ones who had failed and I was the one who had saved them. "So that's it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's what I am to you now. A reminder. A debt. Something to be ignored until you can't anymore." My mom started sobbing quietly. "No, Alex, no," she whispered. "We love you. We're so grateful. We don't know how to—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You don't know how to face me," I finished for her. I looked from my father's defiant face to my mother's tear-streaked one to my brother's averted gaze. There was nothing left to say. There were no magic words that could fix this. The truth was laid bare in the middle of the living room, ugly and undeniable. I had paid their debt, and in doing so I had forfeited my place in the family. My reward for saving them was to be exiled. I turned and walked to the door, my movements stiff and robotic. "Alex, wait," my mom cried out. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "Don't worry," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You won't have to see me again. Consider the debt, all of it cleared." I walked out the door, closed it softly behind me, and didn't look back. The echo of that closing door was the sound of my family life ending. The drive back to Austin after the confrontation was a silent, hollow affair. The fiery anger that had propelled me there was gone, extinguished by the cold, hard reality of my father's words. All that remained was a profound, aching emptiness. It felt as if a vital part of my internal structure, a support beam I didn't even know was there, had been violently ripped out, leaving the rest of me on the verge of collapse. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a pressure in my chest, a heaviness in my limbs, a fog that settled over my mind, muffling the world around me. I drove on autopilot, the familiar highway landmarks passing by like scenes in a movie I was no longer a part of. When I got back to my apartment, the silence was deafening. This small space, once my sanctuary and a symbol of my independence, now felt like a prison cell. It was the place I had returned to after making the decision to save them, the place where I had dismantled my future for them. Now it was just a box filled with the ghosts of my broken promises to myself. For the first few days, I barely moved. I called in sick to work, something I had almost never done, claiming a stomach flu. The thought of facing my colleagues, of having to make small talk and pretend that my world hadn't just imploded, was unbearable. I ordered food I didn't eat, watched shows I didn't see, and let my phone buzz with unanswered calls and texts, mostly from my friend Leo. The geography of my loneliness became painfully clear. My life in Austin, which I had thought was so full and self-sufficient, was actually built around a central, invisible pillar, the idea of family. Even though they were hundreds of miles away, they were my anchor, my origin story. Every success I had was, on some subconscious level, a way of proving myself to them, of showing them that the quiet, responsible middle child had made good. My disciplined saving wasn't just for me. It was a reaction to the chaos they had created. My entire identity was interwoven with theirs, and now that thread had been brutally severed. Who was I without them? Leo, bless his heart, didn't give up. After 3 days of my silence, he showed up at my door with a bag of groceries and a look of stern concern on his face. "Okay, that's enough," he said, pushing past me into the apartment. "You look like hell. Talk to me." And so I did. Sitting at my kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light, I told him everything. I recounted the Thanksgiving dinner, the social media posts, the confrontation, and my father's final devastating words. I laid out the entire ugly story, and for the first time since it had all happened, I let myself break. The tears finally came hot and bitter, the kind of racking sobs that leave you feeling empty and exhausted. Leo didn't say much. He just sat there and listened, a silent, steady presence in the storm of my grief. He let me talk until there were no more words left, just the raw, ragged edges of my pain. When I was done, he just shook his head slowly. "I'm so sorry, man," he said, his voice full of a quiet empathy that was more comforting than any platitude could have been. "I was angry at you for doing it, but I never imagined they would do this." He was right. Even in his most cynical predictions, he hadn't foreseen this level of emotional abandonment. We had both operated on the basic assumption that family at its core was a bond of love. We had failed to account for the toxic, corrosive power of shame. "He's not wrong about one thing, you know," Leo said after a while, his financial advisor brain kicking back in. "You can't hold it over their heads. Not because they don't deserve it, but because you deserve to be free of it. That debt is an anchor, and right now it's drowning you." His words resonated with a painful truth. My final words to my parents, "Consider the debt cleared," had been an act of angry defiance. But Leo was suggesting I make it a genuine act of self-preservation. I had to let go. I had to truly, in my own heart, write it off. Not for them, but for me. I had to sever the last tie that bound me to their dysfunction. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. $300,000. It was a staggering sum to just let go of. It felt like admitting defeat. But what was I holding on for? The slim, non-existent hope that my father would one day show up with a briefcase full of cash and a heartfelt apology. It was a fantasy. Holding on to the idea of the debt was just a way of holding on to the pain, a way of keeping the wound fresh. That conversation with Leo was a turning point. It didn't magically heal me, but it gave me a path forward, a first small step out of the fog. The next day, I went back to work. I started going to the gym again, finding a release in the physical exertion. I started rebuilding my life, but this time I was doing it with a new, painful awareness. I had to build a life that was truly my own one, that wasn't defined in relation to or in opposition to my family. I had to find an identity that was just Alex Carter, a man from Austin, Texas, not Alex Carter, the son of Mark and Susan from Ohio. The silence from my family was absolute. There were no follow-up calls, no pleading texts, no attempts at reconciliation. It was as if I had ceased to exist. I blocked them on social media, not out of spite, but because I couldn't bear the constant painful updates from the life I was no longer a part of. I saw a post from Jessica before I did a cheerful family photo from Christmas. Everyone was there gathered around the tree wearing matching pajamas. My absence wasn't noted or explained. The photo was perfectly composed, perfectly happy, as if the empty space where I should have been had never existed at all. It was a confirmation of what I already knew. The family narrative had been rewritten, and my character had been completely edited out. I was officially a ghost. And so I began the slow, arduous process of learning how to haunt a new life, a life of my own, making a life where the only person I had to save was myself. It was the loneliest, most difficult work I had ever done. The months following the final schism with my family were a study in monotones. Life settled into a flat, colorless routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. I was functioning, but I wasn't living. I was a machine executing a program my emotional core powered down to conserve energy. The vibrant, ambitious man who had meticulously planned his future seemed like a stranger from another life. The dream of starting my own software company was a ghost that haunted my quiet evenings, a painful reminder of a future I had traded away. How could I even think about taking the risk of entrepreneurship now with my savings at zero and my spirit at an all-time low? I threw myself into my work at the tech company, hoping the complex logic of coding could bring some order to the chaos in my head. I took on extra projects, worked late into the night, and volunteered for weekend shifts. My boss was thrilled. I got a promotion and a significant raise. In the eyes of the world, I was succeeding. My bank account, for the first time in months, began to show signs of life. I started saving again, but the act felt different now. Before, saving had been an act of hope, of building towards a dream. Now it was an act of fear. I was building a wall brick by digital dollar to protect myself from the world. Every deposit was a declaration that I would never be that vulnerable again, that I would never again put my security in the hands of others, not even those who were supposed to love me most. The loneliness was a constant low-grade fever. Leo was a rock, consistently checking in, dragging me out for a beer or a hike, even when I insisted I wanted to be alone. But he had his own life, a serious girlfriend and a demanding job. I couldn't be his full-time charity case. I realized how much I had relied on the passive connection to my family. Even when we weren't close, the knowledge that they were there a phone call away had filled a certain space in my life. Now that space was a gaping void. Holidays were the worst. I spent Christmas Day at a movie theater by myself, eating popcorn for dinner, just to avoid the crushing silence of my apartment and the imagined sounds of my family's laughter in Ohio. One evening, about 8 months after the confrontation, I received an email that jolted me out of my stupor. It was from my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She was the one member of the family I had always felt a quiet kinship with. She was a librarian, a gentle soul who had always seemed a bit out of place amidst the boisterous, often dramatic energy of the rest of the family. The email was short and hesitant. Subject: thinking of you. Dear Alex, I know it's been a while, and I hope this email finds you well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I know things are complicated with the family. I don't know the whole story, just bits and pieces I've overheard, and I know it's not my place to interfere. But I wanted you to know that I miss you. I've always been so proud of the man you've become. If you ever feel like talking, or if you're ever back in Ohio and want to get a quiet cup of coffee, please know my door's always open. Love, Aunt Carol. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open and raw. It was the first message I had received from any family member that wasn't tinged with guilt, defensiveness, or a request. It was just simple, uncomplicated affection. I read the email over and over, and for the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of warmth, a pinprick of light in the darkness. I wrote her back immediately, thanking her and promising to take her up on that coffee the next time I was in the state. That small act of connection cracked something open in me. It made me realize that by completely shutting myself off, I was allowing my parents' actions to define my entire capacity for family and connection. I had let their betrayal poison everything. Maybe, just maybe, I could start to rebuild not what I had lost, but something new. I started saying yes more often. Yes to after-work drinks with colleagues. Yes to joining a recreational soccer league. Yes to Leo when he suggested a weekend road trip to Big Bend. It was on that road trip, sitting by a campfire under a vast, star-dusted Texas sky, that I finally had an epiphany. Leo and I were talking about the future, and he asked me for the first time in a long time about my dream of starting a company. I don't know, man, I said, poking at the fire with a stick. That dream feels like it belongs to another person. I don't have the capital, and honestly, I don't think I have the guts anymore. Leo looked at me, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. The capital will come back. You're a machine at saving. The guts. I think the guts are still in there, Alex. You just have to decide to use them for yourself this time. What happened with your family was a tragedy. But if you let it kill your dream, you're letting them win. You're letting them take your future twice. His words hit me with the force of a physical impact, letting them take your future twice. He was right. I had already given them my past savings. If I gave up on my future ambitions because of the trauma they had caused, then I was handing them a victory they didn't deserve. I was letting their failure define my entire life's trajectory. That night, something shifted. The grief was still there, a scar I would carry forever. But beneath it, a tiny defiant spark of the old Alex, the builder, the dreamer, began to glow. When I got back to Austin, I opened the business plan I had written years ago. It was gathering dust in a folder on my hard drive. The details were outdated, the market had changed, but the core idea was still solid. For the first time in almost a year, I felt a flicker of genuine excitement, a sense of purpose that wasn't born from fear or obligation. I didn't have the $300,000 I had once deemed necessary, but I had my salary, my renewed savings plan, and a promotion at a well-respected company. I had skills. I had a reputation. Maybe I didn't need to do it all at once. Maybe like my dad should have, I could start small. I could start doing some freelance consulting on the side, building a client base, saving every penny of that extra income. I could build my dreams slowly, meticulously, and this time on my own terms. It would take longer. It would be harder. But it would be mine, and no one could take it away from me. The future was no longer a ghost to be mourned, but a shattered mosaic. I could begin to piece back together, creating a new picture, one I had never planned, but one that would be entirely my own. The process of starting over from scratch was a quiet, inglorious thing. It wasn't some inspiring montage set to an upbeat pop song. It was late nights after a full day at the corporate job, staring at my laptop screen until my eyes burned building out lines of code for a freelance project I'd landed through a friend of a friend. It was saying no to weekend hangouts so I could spend 15 hours debugging an application for a client on the West Coast. It was an exhaustion that settled deep in my bones, but this time it was different. This exhaustion wasn't the heavy toll of unreciprocated sacrifice. It was the satisfying ache of building something with my own two hands for myself. Every check I received from that freelance work wasn't just money, it was a brick. I was no longer hoarding capital as a shield against fear. I was accumulating proof that I could. Proof that my value wasn't in a number in a savings account, but in my skills, my persistence, and my ability to create value out of thin air. I opened a separate bank account for my fledgling business, which I gave the almost laughably simple name Carter Solutions. But to me, that name carried weight. It wasn't about chasing some flashy dream. It was about providing practical, reliable solutions. It was who I was, reliable. But this time, that reliability was for my clients and my own future, not for a family who took it for granted. My social life began to tentatively resprout, too, like stubborn wildflowers pushing up through cracks in the concrete. I went to a tech meetup downtown, mostly because Leo bullied me into it. I stood awkwardly in a corner, nursing a warm beer, feeling completely out of my depth amidst the buzzing conversations about funding rounds and IPOs. Then a woman approached me. She had a bright smile and inquisitive eyes. "You have the look of a programmer, not a venture capitalist," she said, her tone teasing. Her name was Sarah, a UX designer. We talked for 2 straight hours. The conversation was easy, natural. She was smart, funny, and genuinely passionate about her work. For the first time in over a year, I had a conversation with someone new where I didn't feel like I was wearing a heavy, invisible mask. We went on a date, and then another. With Sarah, things were different. She was curious about my past, but not invasive. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her the condensed version of my family saga, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. "That's unbelievable," she said, resting her hand gently on mine. "To go through that and still be standing. Alex, that shows an incredible amount of strength." Her words weren't flattery. They were an acknowledgement. She didn't see a victim or a fool. She saw a survivor. To be seen that way started to heal cracks in my self-perception I didn't even know were still there. She became my new family, one built on mutual respect and understanding, one that I had chosen. A year and a half after that confrontation, Carter Solutions landed its first major client, a 6-month contract that was substantial enough for me to seriously consider leaving my day job. It was a terrifying leap. I had grown accustomed to the security of a steady paycheck, but with Sarah and Leo's encouragement, I did it. My last day at the tech firm was surreal. I left with well wishes, a severance package, and a dizzying sense of freedom. I was my own boss. My fate, for better or for worse, was now entirely in my hands. The business grew slowly but surely. I hired my first part-time contractor. I moved my office from my kitchen table to a small co-working space. Each milestone, no matter how small, felt like a victory. But the past has a way of circling back often when you least expect it. I got a letter in the mail forwarded from my old address. The handwriting on the envelope was my Aunt Carol's. Inside was a long, handwritten letter on thin, delicate stationery. Her letter was full of warmth and sadness. She told me what had happened after I'd cut off contact. It wasn't a story of remorse or redemption. It was a story of a slow, inevitable collapse. My dad's new business, the one built on a more realistic foundation, had eventually failed. This time there was no safety net. He had fallen into old habits, made poor decisions, and there was no Alex fund to bail him out. They had to sell the house, the very house I had saved, and move into a much smaller rental in a different town. My aunt wrote that my father had become a bitter, quiet man. My mother was heartbroken, her health failing. Jessica's perfect life had fractured too. Tom, the successful dentist, had grown tired of constantly dealing with his in-laws' financial dramas. The strain had cracked their marriage. They were separated. And Ben, my free-spirited brother, had drifted away again once it became clear there was no more money to be had, leaving a few minor debts for my parents to handle. As I read the letter, I didn't feel a single ounce of schadenfreude. There was no sense of, I told you so. There was just a deep, hollow sadness, a profound waste, sadness for the people they could have been, for the family we could have been. My money hadn't been the solution. It had just been a temporary painkiller for a chronic disease. It had allowed them to continue the delusion for a little while longer, delaying the inevitable crash. The disease wasn't dead. It was a lack of accountability, it was pride, and it was an inability to face the truth. I sat there with Carol's letter in my hands, Sarah sitting quietly beside me, giving me the space to process. She didn't ask what I was going to do. She was just there. And in that moment I realized something. I had spent the better part of my life trying to fix something that was irrevocably broken. I had poured my energy, my future, and my self-worth into the cracks of the Carter family, hoping against hope that I could hold it together. But you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can't fix people who won't admit they're broken. Aunt Carol's letter wasn't a call to action. It was an obituary for the family I once knew, and reading it strangely provided the final closure. Their pain was no longer mine to carry. Their collapse was not my failure to fix. I had bought them a second chance and they had squandered it. My debt was finally truly paid, not in dollars and cents, but in the bitter acceptance that I had done all I could. Now it was time to focus on building my own blueprint, a life constructed on a solid foundation of self-respect, chosen love, and a peace I had earned for myself. 3 years later, I was standing in a manicured garden, a glass of champagne in my hand, wearing a suit that fit better than anything I'd ever owned. The Austin sun was warm, and the sound of laughter from friends and colleagues was all around me. Carter Solutions was no longer a one-man operation in my apartment. It was a small but thriving software firm, with 12 employees, a bright office downtown, and a reputation for excellence. Beside me, Sarah, now my wife, was laughing with Leo. We had bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, one with a backyard and enough room for a rescue dog named Buster. It was the future I had once dreamed of, but it was sweeter because I had built it from the ashes, not from a pre-written plan. Life was good. Sustainably good. The wound of my family had faded to a pale scar, a part of my story, but no longer the defining chapter. I still kept in touch with Aunt Carol, sending cards and making calls on holidays, but from the rest of them there was only silence. Until an invitation arrived. It was thick and cream-colored with looping cursive script. My brother Ben was getting married. Holding the invitation, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Not anger, but a kind of weariness. "You don't have to go, Sarah," said watching me from across the kitchen island. "No one would blame you." And she was right. I could have thrown it in the trash and no one would have thought less of me. But as I looked at it, I realized something. The fear of seeing them was gone. The urge to confront them was gone. All that was left was a distant curiosity. How much had I changed? Could I stand in a room with them and feel, "Nothing, I think I should go," I said, surprising myself. But not for them. For me. I just need to close that door for the last time. We drove to Ohio. The wedding was at a country club, a venue clearly paid for by the bride's family. As we walked in, it felt like stepping into another dimension. Familiar faces turned to look, aunts, uncles, cousins. There were curious glances, hushed whispers. I was no longer Alex, the quiet nephew. I was a story, a cautionary tale. I saw Jessica first. She was thinner and there were lines around her eyes I didn't recognize. Her smile didn't reach them. "Alex," she said, her voice hesitant. "You came." "Jessica," I nodded, introducing Sarah. "Congratulations to Ben." Our conversation was short and stilted. She offered a vague, half-hearted apology. Things just got out of hand. "You know how Mom and Dad are." I just looked at her. "I hope you're doing okay, Jess." I didn't say it with malice. I meant it, and I realized I didn't need her apology anymore. Forgiveness wasn't something she could give me. It was something I had already given myself. My mother found me by the bar. She looked much older. Her former vibrancy had been replaced by a tired fragility. She hugged me, and for a second I felt like a child again. "Oh, Alex," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "I'm so sorry. For everything." This time the sorrow seemed genuine. I hugged her back gently. "I know, Mom." There was no grand absolution, no promise of reconciliation. Just a sad acknowledgement of all that had been lost. And then I saw my father. He was standing alone near a window, looking out at the golf course, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was no longer the blustering man of big plans. He looked small, defeated. He saw me and nodded, beckoning me over. We stood in silence for a moment. "Your company?" "Carol tells me it's doing well," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm proud." "Thanks, Dad," I said. He cleared his throat, the discomfort plain on his face. "Listen about that money. I know things went bad. I always meant to, Dad." I cut him off, my voice gentle but firm. For the first time, I was in control of this conversation. He finally looked at me. "Dad, it was never really about the money." His eyes flickered with confusion. "Then what was it about?" he asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the solid presence of Sarah just a few feet away, lending me strength. It was about respect. It was about honesty. It was about seeing me as your son, not as a solution. "The money is gone, Dad. Let it go. What I can't get back is the trust. I forgive you, but I can't go back. I hope you find peace." I had said my piece. There was no anger, no bitterness, just the final truth. I rested a hand on his shoulder for a moment, a gesture not of a son to a father, but of one man to another. Then I turned and walked away back toward my wife. As we left hand in hand out into the cool evening air, I felt an indescribable lightness. I paid off my family's $300,000 debt, and they shut me out. That is the truth. But it's not the end of the story. By shutting me out, they inadvertently gave me the greatest gift possible. They set me free. Free from the weight of their expectations, free from the cycle of their dysfunction, free from the misguided belief that love could be purchased with sacrifice. I had walked into that house as their son, carrying the burden of our shared past. And I walked out as just Alex. For the first time in my life, I could hear the sound of my own name, not muffled by the echoes of their needs and their disappointments. And it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you give more than you get, hit that like button and subscribe. Because sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you truly deserve. Thanks for listening.